Chapter 4. You might think I'd have been more surprised, asked a few questions about OJ's suggestion, or chucked it right out the window. But truth is, I'd been expecting it. The past 4 or 5 years I'd had this growing, insistent hankering for getting back to America, and rich girl whose rich daddy works as an immigration lawyer fantasies aside, I'd figured a hike across a trans-border wilderness would be about the best and most realistic option. I'd been researching it. I'd been reading of people who had tried and failed, gotten an insight into the technology they were using, helicopters, infrared beams and laser sensors, triggers in the ground, drones and planes, border patrol on horseback, cameras in trees, etc. And I'd scoured satellite images of forests and mountains that straddled that imaginary line along the 49th parallel. It wasn't going to be easy. All the stories, naturally, were of people who had been caught, drug smugglers, immigrants, criminals, all further increasing security. Not people who had made it and who had rushed online to advertise the route they'd taken and told others, "Go here, this is the one, you can waltz right in." I couldn't help but smile at the irony, that it was 9/11 that had caused all this American border paranoia, and now here I was, at the behest of the man claiming to be behind the whole thing, needing to circumvent all these increased measures in order to arrive at the truth of that day. I had thought, in all those weeks and months of research, and in my simple boyish longing for adventure, that it was nothing more than a desire for old friends, and to see once again places that had been important in my youth that was driving my irrational quest to break into America. Each of the past 5 summers I'd put it on the table before me. Do it. Do the mad thing, I'd tell myself. You don't want to be on your deathbed, not having done the thing you want to do, for the sake of security and not taking a risk, just choosing the safe option like everybody else. And every year something would stop me. A job offer or a bad dream, a lost passport or a weird sign from some passing stranger in the street. Seriously, 2 years before, when I was thinking of it stronger than ever, some drunk guy near Peckham had screamed in my face, "Try it, my lad, and you'll end up in jail. Don't fuck with America." And so I'd let it slide, all the time thinking and hoping that there would be a right time and that the right time would reveal itself to me. Well, I figured, it looks like the time was now. Though after so many previous occasions when I'd felt it was the right time, I tried not to rush it. Resolved to sleep on it, left myself open to mysterious, stinking tramps screaming the answer to my future on random streets in the middle of the day. In the end, the answer came in a much more pleasant way than that. I don't know if I've mentioned this before, but I'm one of those guys who has visions and dreams. Maybe you picked up on that, the way I didn't freak out when I saw what I saw in the sky during OJ's first phone call, that he somehow weirdly knew about and was maybe even directing. I'll talk about that later. Actually, I won't. But anyway. Thing is, and maybe it's a bit odd to be writing about this, but whenever I'm about to do something potentially life-changing or desperately need an answer to a question, some clue as to how to make a decision, I either have a dream or, on rare occasions, a full-blown, genuine, real vision. It's pretty groovy, to be honest. I fair love some. And many is the morning when I wake up disappointed at just having had a standard dream, when I figured something special was a-brewing. But whenever I need 'em, they come, and this time was no exception. I slept early that night and was sleeping good when I was suddenly awoken around 5 a.m. I opened my eyes. I was in my room, could see the outline of the bedroom furniture, a little crack of dawn's early light shining around the curtains, and I could see my covers and the pillow and my hands. But I could also see something else. I was, at the same time, elsewhere. It was as though another reality was being superimposed over my usual surroundings. I closed my eyes. The superimposed reality became everything. I was in it as realistically as I'm sitting here now, reading this book into this microphone, lying on a bed, naked. Anyway, back to the vision. I was sort of floating around a town, a disembodied spirit, gently swooping down streets, turning corners, following roads. Everything was in perfect detail. The cars, the hedges and fences around the hedges, the trees and lawns and mailboxes. It wasn't England, that was for sure. It was North America. I opened my eyes, and once again I could see both realities. I was entirely conscious of being a body in a bed in Leeds, the cup from last night's tea, the lampshade with the little dangling tassels, and also of being a man who was right smack bang in the middle of a real genuine vision. One that seemed useful, one that seemed like it might be an answer to the question of whether or not I should embark on this mad scheme to break into America. I closed my eyes again. I went deeper into it, satisfied that I knew what was going on, that this weren't no mere hallucination or hypnagogic state. I carried on floating down streets, investigating my surroundings, looking more closely at things. I could zoom right in on the fences and the houses, see chips in paint, screw heads, numbers on doors. It was pretty ecstatic, the feeling of it, to be consciously aware of what was going on, and to be that disembodied spirit so calmly and casually cruising around this other reality. After a little while I thought to ask a question. Okay, I'm in North America, but where exactly? A few seconds later, I turned a corner, went past a few buildings, and saw in front of me a whole bunch of flagpoles with flags fluttering atop them. The flags were Canadian. There were 4 tall ones in the middle of a circle of around a dozen smaller ones. I had my answer. I knew in that instant I would be buying a ticket to Canada, and soon, like as soon as I got up. I opened my eyes, I felt incredibly happy. I went back to sleep. And when I woke again some 3 hours later, I got immediately online, noticed a weirdly cheap one-way ticket to Vancouver, departing the next day. Really, honestly, bizarrely cheap, given that it was the middle of the summer and I was flying at such short notice. And it was as simple as that. Click, click, gone. I'll have a sip of tea now. But you won't know that. Because this is going to get deleted. Or maybe not. Chapter 5. I landed in Vancouver around 11 in the morning and made my way to passport control. Waiting in line for immigration is always a nervy affair for me. When you've been deported from the US 3 times and had 1 or 2 run-ins with the Canadians, it's bound to be. Well, I say deported 3 times. It was actually 1 deportation and 2 refused entries, but for simplicity's sake, I usually lump them all together. It amounts to much the same thing. The first one was in 1998 when I was 22 years old and spending a glorious summer thumbing it around the western US, hiking through deserts, camping in wild Utah Canyon country, whooping it up with drunk Indians. Then one day I was riding hobo style on a freight train across the plains of Montana and got pulled off by the cops. They were waiting for me as we slowed down to pass through the small, nothing-much grain town of Shelby. Some busybody citizen I'd probably waved at must have called them, or maybe I'd actually waved at one of the officers on his way to work. They charged me with criminal trespass and called the nearby border agents, and the border agents told me that, being as I'd clearly overstayed my 3-month tourist visa, I'd been there almost 2.5 years by then, I would be on my way back to England and banned from returning for a minimum of 5 years. It wasn't so bad. A free British Airways flight from Seattle, pissed out of my head on multiple free booze, and, in any case, I was back in the US just a few months later. OJ was right. Back then, there simply wasn't much in the way of linked-up computers or record-keeping. I'd flown into Vancouver, Cuba, decided to take a chance at the border, and the nice officer there, after disappearing with my replacement, differently numbered passport for a good 15 minutes, had returned with a spanking, shining new 3-month visa, and I was back in the US once more. I stayed another 15 months, punctuated and re-legitimized by a couple of trips in and out of Mexico. It was another groovy good time, great friends and great travels, all those people and places I hadn't seen for such a long time, getting on for 18 years now. I tried though, hence the 20-year ban. I'd flown into Boston back in 2000 and been shipped back the next day. My 5-year ban doubled. And then a year later I'd been in Canada and thought I'd head down to the border crossing south of Vancouver where I'd had my earlier success. But no such luck this time. It was post 9/11, and one 8-hour-long interrogation later, I was booted back into Canada, and my ban doubled once again. This was January 2001, and it was now August 2017. Not so long to go, but the itch grows strong, and the urge for adventure, for doing something outrageous, is much more appealing than boring old bureaucracy and shelling out money and waiting in line and doing what I'm told. Also, a year ago I told a bunch of American friends that in the completely unlikely scenario that mad-headed Donald Trump would get into power, I'd definitely 100% do it, knowing how much he hates illegals and wants to keep those borders tight. A flip comment made in jest, and, of course, there was no way a supposedly developed nation could contain enough dumb bastard people to vote in a lunatic like that. But they did. And not that I was on that plane to fulfill an off-the-cuff promise to do something crazy because of Trump. And yet, my own urges, that Trump idea, and now OJ and all the visions and dreams, it was all adding up to something I could only describe as meant to be. Trump, by the way, means fart where I come from, as in to trump, verb, or did you do a trump, noun, or it smelled like someone had trumped, past participle. That always makes me chuckle, and I think it's a shame more people aren't aware of the true meaning of his name, as it's also a shame that he isn't called Peter, like the rabbit, rather than Donald, like the unintelligible duck. In French, Peter, or péter, means to fart. So if he'd been called Peter, as he no doubt should have been, then the US would now be being led by a man whose name literally translates as to fart, fart, which would perhaps have made the whole thing worthwhile. And as if by magic, or rather, so I can manufacture something of a segue, right there in that slowly shambling queue of weary travellers full of airplane food and airplane movies, I felt my arse cheeks ripple and a steady sigh of air gently make its way from my inner sanctum, from the Holy of Holies, and out into the physical world, innocent and fresh as a newborn babe. I shuffled away from it, looking around and wrinkling my nose. I did my best impersonation of a man who had picked up on the scent of another man's fart and was trying to figure out where it had come from, grimacing disapprovingly that someone would have the audacity and lack of shame to release such a stink in such tight and public quarters, all in a way that looked nothing like I was trying to cover up my own omission and absolve myself of the crime, like people usually do. Raisins it smelled of. Chewed up raisins and curry, which was about right, I figured, given I'd eaten half a kilo of Sainsbury's Basics raisins on the way to the airport that morning, and enjoyed a lovely piping hot airplane vegetarian lentil curry on the flight. I wondered if it would still be there, lingering and waiting for me, when the queues snaked back around. It was. Oh, those poor people, having to walk so slowly through it. Did any of them suspect? Did any of them know it was me? But how could they? There were hundreds of us. It could have been anyone's anus hole that had opened up and squeaked its mysterious delight into existence. Trump, it had said, and then moved on, leaving behind its foul toxicity for the rest of the world to inhale. I approached a lady sitting in her little immigration booth. She was small but hot. Something about all that uniform and padding and weapons that really does it for me. The hottest women in the world, of course, are Israeli women soldiers, their ill-fitting pea-green uniforms still unable to disguise the loveliness of shapely young bosoms, groups of them hanging out at bus stations ready for their weekend leave, masses of curling Jewish hair flowing like the Jordan, a latte in one hand, a mobile in the other, and strung across their backs, casual as you like, a massive, beefy submachine gun, all black and oiled and dripping with potential. She stands there laughing and chatting with her friends. She seems so beautiful and sweet, but you just know she could kick your ass any time she felt like it, throw you ragdoll-like to the ground and stamp her heavy Israeli boot down on your throat. And then she'd point that gun in your face, shove its nozzle in your mouth, and uttering guttural Hebrew indecipherables that may well be threats, may well be pleasantries, give you the biggest boner of your life. Hot, I tells you, incomprehensibly lovely. But that's Israel, and that's a whole other story. This is North America, where immigration officials are generally considered among the most unpleasant people on the planet, and where you'd better tread carefully, lest you find yourself banged up and deported, as I invariably do. She takes my passport and places it face down on her little scanner. I would give anything to take a look at her box and see what information is flashing up on her screen, and find out what I need to lie about and where I can be truthful. Purpose of visit, she says? Probably this is one of the places I need to tell some lies. Probably it's not so smart to tell her I've come to Canada so I can break into the US and go visit OJ Simpson because he wants me to write a book about he, George Bush, and some space lizards masterminded 9/11. Or, who knows, maybe it is a time for honesty as the best policy. Maybe it'll be like one of those moments in the movies where the cornered protagonist is forced to blurt out the truth, and the truth is so ridiculous that all the baddies just laugh and send him on his way. Yeah, right, she'll say, good one, and stamp me in. She'll wipe a tear from her eye and seek to compose her chortles just in time to pretend to be badass for the next person in line, which won't be quite quickly enough, which will then cause that person to think they can make a joke, mistakenly, and that'll lead to them getting into a whole host of shit, deported or jailed, or maybe even tasered and left writhing on the floor having multiple heart attacks and then dead, all because I caused an immigration official to crack an unsuppressible smile by telling the mad truth. Such are the fine lines, the seemingly inconsequential moments of decision between life and death. One man sitting comfy in his living room chair decides he wants a Twix and ends up dead in a gutter. Another wins the lottery and meets the woman of his dreams, who later breaks his heart and steals all his money. And so it goes. I think better of it. I tell her I'm there to visit some friends and see a bit of the country. Can I see your return ticket, she says. I reach into my back pocket. I'm all prepared. Those 24 hours between buying the flight and getting on board have allowed me to get up to all sorts of mischief. For when you've travelled as much as I have, in the way that I have, you've learned a trick or two. Number one, they like you to have a ticket out of their country. Not only do they not want you staying and, picking fruit or something, but they also don't understand the idea of freewheeling, of making it up as you go. They, like most people, live in a world of concrete plans and dates that are fixed well into the future. They can't conceive of a man like me who lives one day at a time, just like their beloved spiritual leaders and inspirations were always telling them to do. Back in the day, back when we used travel agents, before we forgot it was possible to buy things from another human being, face to face, rather than clickety-click on a machine, there'd always be this dreaded moment when they'd ask, "And when do you want to come back?" And my mind would just freeze. What I really wanted to say was, well, how should I know? I haven't even gotten there yet. I don't know if I'll like it. I don't know who I'll meet, what opportunities might arise. What if I meet my soulmate and want to marry her? What if I get offered a job? What if I bump into someone, I hit it off with them, we decide to go to the neighbouring country and then to some other country and from there and so on, and Or what if I'm impossibly bored and immediately realise I'd rather be home in my own comfortable English bed, watching the cricket and sipping tea with my pinky raised and God blessing the Queen? Oh, how I long for the day when one can just rock up to an airport, or a train station for that matter, and buy a one-way ticket to wherever, and not have to pay 5 times the price of buying one a month in advance, and everyone in charge would understand. I'd never have to plan anything ever again. But then again, I don't do so bad, what with miracle tickets like this one. It does seem that whenever I need to be somewhere, the ticket is always waiting for me. Plus, there are always ways around it. I pull out my piece of paper. It's a genuine paid-for airplane ticket for an Air Canada flight from Vancouver to Mexico City, departing in a month. It's got my genuine name on it. There's nothing bogus about it. It's not like one of those Photoshop jobs I sometimes knock up for the megabus when I've left it till the last minute and there's nothing reasonably priced left. She checks it out. She's satisfied by it. And so she should be. Like I say, it's 100% legit. But at the same time, there's no way I'll be getting on that plane. You see, here's what you do. Canada wants to see a return flight, but you don't want to buy one. Except there's a loophole. For, in Canadian law, you can get a full refund for any plane ticket within 24 hours of purchase. So the morning of your flight, you buy your ticket out of there. Doesn't matter how much it costs, nor where it's to. Hell, buy a first-class ticket to Monte Carlo if you want to feel momentarily Rockefeller. And then when you land, you show it to them, and they accept. Cancel it once you're through the other side, and voila, you've entered the nation free from any obligation to be anywhere in particular on any particular date, just as it should be. Number 2, they sometimes want to see how much cash you have, just to ensure that, once again, you won't be scampering off straight from the airport to a fruit farm somewhere to earn less than minimum wage, putting peaches into crates and keeping the economy afloat. So, also in my back pocket, I've got a nice printout of my very healthy bank statement, which shows that I'm a moderately well-off white guy, just here on a trip to visit his friends, and no danger to the fruit-picking industry whatsoever. Only thing is, it's totally bogus. After buying this plane ticket out here, my bank balance is down to about $300. But I'm good with Photoshop, and it's easy cutting and pasting numbers, moving a few digits here and there, cranking up the balance till it's enough to satisfy one of them there normal human beings who can't conceive of being in a foreign country and living on less than $100 a day, with all their hotels and excursions lined up, a big giant safety net woven from money, ready to catch them should anything go amiss. These things, thanks to my hitchhiking youth, spent sleeping by the side of the highway and existing for months on trust, bananas, and the kindness of strangers, these things aren't a problem for me. I'm lucky in some ways, and unlucky in others. But that, like what happened to me in Israel with those gorgeous Israeli women soldiers, is a whole other story. Enjoy your stay, she says, her eyes already moving onto the person behind me. Is it my imagination, or is he grimacing, scrunching up his nose, looking for all the world like a man who's been walking, nay, wading, through a cloud of invisible brand smoke these past 15 minutes? Have I been silently and constantly trumping the whole time I was in that queue, and not noticing, so focused was an eye on this penultimate barrier into the great grand nation? I stop for a moment and take a whiff, glance at the guy now standing in front of my tiny lovely lady and at the people standing behind him, and, judging by the looks on their faces, it seems that I have. Chapter 6. I was waiting for my ride for a strangely long time. After all the momentum of suddenly zooming to Canada and the nervousness of fartily making it through immigration, it was 3 weeks before anybody showed up to get me. They got distracted, I guess, had things to do in real life, or were being lazy and afraid. Also, no one could commit to it. At first I thought it would be my Canadian friend Shailene, like it happened in real life. Hopefully that's not too confusing. But then Steve, an old school buddy from Yorkshire, said he'd do it, even though he wasn't in Canada, had never been there, and didn't know how to drive. Despite those obstacles, though, I thought it a top idea. Steve's about the funniest person I know, so I figured that'd be a great opportunity to inject a bit of comedy into the next few chapters. Plus, he's a bit upset that he never made it into my first book, despite being my best bud for years, so I felt I owed him one. But then I realized, what with him being so quick-witted, hilarious, and imaginative and creative, not tools in my repertoire at all, it would be difficult for me to do him justice, and I knocked it on the head. But at least he made it into the book this time, and in a nicely complimentary way too. In the end, AJ Cowling said he'd drive up from California to get me. He was, after all, supposed to meet me on the other side, and, well, what do you know, here he comes now, driving that same old famous white Bronco from the low-speed police chase of all them years ago. Would you credit it? Amazing. So, he pulled up beside me and wound down the window, pushed his sunglasses to the end of his nose and peered over the top, stared for several seconds with his mouth hanging open. "Shit," he said, and shook his head and laughed. I won't do the accent. Pushed his glasses back on, gripped the steering wheel and stared straight ahead. Get in the car, honky," he said. "Let's go." He didn't even look at me, didn't even get out to open the trunk, not even a hug. All this bloody way, and this is what greets me? I'd wanted to forget all about the wait and start things off nice, but this... I threw my bag in the back seat, the famous back seat where OJ had cowered, cradling a Magnum, gun, not an ice cream, and twirling a false moustache as he plotted his escape. I went to open the passenger door. "In the back," AJ said. "Goddamn," he added. "What you think you are? Back of the bus, honky. Ain't that right?" He chuckled. He slapped the wheel. He obviously liked this joke. "That's right, white boy," he said. "Back of the bus. You know it. Back of the bus with all the other white boys." What the fuck is this? He kept on laughing. This was not going as I'd hoped. Fuming, I opened the rear door, pushed some food and drink cartons aside, and slid into the seat, doing my best to avoid what looked suspiciously like a fairly fresh bloodstain. "You took your time," I blurted out, before I could stop myself. All those days pacing up and down the airport concourse, steering myself onto the moral high ground, deciding to forgive. There could be 1,000 reasons he could be 3 weeks late. Maybe he'd had an accident, maybe someone had died. But I just couldn't help myself, and instantly regretted it. "Me," he spat. "Me. You're the one who writes this shit. You're the one twiddling your thumbs and playing with your balls with your dick up your ass. You need to pull your goddamn socks up, boy. Know what I'm saying? You need to get your shit together. 'Tain't my fault you was waiting. I've been ready. I've been driving around this goddamn airport 3 goddamn weeks while you been sitting there with your balls in a sling doing fuck all, except procrastinating and watching your stupid videos. Shit." Well, I had to laugh at that. What imagery! Imagine a man all at once sticking his dick up his arse, aka self-fucking, twiddling his thumbs, playing with his testicles, which are in a sling, pulling his socks up, and getting his shit together, presumably with the dexterous penis that's currently situated inside his own anus. My mind was fairly doing gymnastics of its own, trying to compute and visualize the whole thing. And then, "You want to pull your head out your ass, bro. You feel me?" "Shit," he said. "God damn." Well, the head up there was just too much. The guy in my mental imagery could no longer keep his balance, toppled over, and ended up in a contorted naked heap on the floor, head stuck between his thighs and thumbs, balls, penis and fingers tied in knots. I lost it. I burst out laughing. I got the giggles gig time. I'll leave that in. I got the giggles big time, as I'm prone, and soon tears were streaming down my face. AJ looked at me in the rearview mirror, pushed his sunglasses to the end of his nose again, and stared. The fuck you laughing at, bro? He was trying to be angry, but I could see this smile threatening to break through at the corners of his mouth. I said, but then I'd look at his face, at the glasses on the end of his nose, at his pretend tough guy persona staring at me, at the restrained twitching of his smile, and I'd just lose it, going tee. Fuck, he said. White boy's fucking crazy. He shook his head and a giggle sneaked through. Christ knows what OJ sees in you, but what Juice wants, Juice gets, aight? He put the car in gear and pulled out. He gave it one last shit, and then came out with an actual genuine laugh. Come on, Honky, he said. I was only fucking with you. Climb up here to the front. Gotta get off on the right foot, you know, show you who's boss. But you's all right. Come on, get up here. I apologize for the accent. It's preposterous. I was still chortling, but I had it together enough to traverse his collection of 40-ounce soda cups and squeeze through into the passenger seat. I rubbed my aching jaw and wiped my face. Thought again about the pink-skinned and naked contortionist with the head and penis up his arse, struggling to get himself free. All them fingers and thumbs, playing with balls and twiddling themselves silly. You better, bro, AJ said. You better calm the fuck down if you want to make this thing work. You feel me? I got it, I said, gulping in some air. Oop. Sorry. 3 weeks, man. It's a long time to be staring at a laptop. I mean, waiting at an airport. I must have worked a screw loose or something. I'm Marlon, I said, holding out my hand. Shit, he said. What the fuck is that? He just stared at my hand, and after about 5 seconds of holding it there and being struck by how remarkably white and limp it looked, I quietly dropped it in my lap. AC, he said. AC Cowlings. You know my goddamn name. Shit, I thought. And all this time I've been calling him AJ, which of course sent me into fits of giggles anew. God damn, said AC. Motherfucker's crazy. This gonna be one long goddamn ride. But, truth be told, he was laughing now too. Chapter 7. Listen, said AC, there's something you gotta do for me. What's that, I said. We were about 20 minutes into the drive and I was calm now and digging the crisp blue sky and wide Canadian avenues, the low buildings and Chinese grocery stores and everything laid out on a grid. These streets made sense to me. It felt like home. You gotta sort out my voice, he said. I don't talk like that. Like what, I asked. All this fucking honky and shit. That's not me. I've been to college, bro. I got an education. So how do you talk? What? He said. He kind of coughed it out as though incredulous. I talk like anyone, man. Just like any normal guy. I looked at him and tried to work out what that meant. And then I realized he was right, that I'd been horribly misrepresenting him for the awful triad reasons of shallow stereotyping, not doing any research, and, more than anything, purely and simply because it amused me. I felt terrible. I was basing his entire demeanor on characters I'd seen on TV shows, and not the good ones either. Sorry, AC, I said, and genuinely meant it. I guess I let my imagination run away with me. Also, there aren't any videos of you online, so I didn't have anything to go by. Plus, to be brutally honest, I think you're funnier and more interesting the way I'm making you, and it sort of tickles me to have you talk like that. You gonna sort it out? He said. "I'll see what I can do," I said. But I already knew the answer, and I guessed he did too, judging by the stony expression on his face as we drove on in silence. Probably, if this thing was going to work out, I was going to have him forget this conversation and lose a few layers of self-awareness too. Could be kind of awkward otherwise. "Oh, one more thing," he said. "You really need to step up your level of research. Broncos are two-door cars. They don't have back doors or trunks. Everybody knows that." I swiveled around in my seat and looked, and, of course, he was right. "Well, shit," I said, and this time we both laughed. And, judging by the way he laughed, as though he was a man who didn't possess one single ounce of ill feeling towards me and had forgotten all about our recent tensions, I figured everything with AC Cowlings was going to work out fine too.